Figures of Transcendentalism. Ralph Waldo Emerson is truly the center of the American Transcendental movement. He set out most of its ideas and values in a book called Nature, which was published in 1836. Nature represented at least 10 years of intense study in philosophy, religion, and literature. He was born in 1803 to a conservative Unitarian minister and a quiet mother. Ralph was a middle son, and not much was expected of him. His father died when he was only 8 years old, the first in a string of deaths which would shape his life. All three of his brothers, his first wife when he was 20 years old, and his older son died when he was 5. Probably the most powerful personal influence on him for years was his intellectual and eccentric, death-obsessed, puritanical aunt, who was called Mary Moody Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a very influential philosopher. Before him, most people blindly followed what they were told, but Emerson instilled in them a sense of curiosity, almost rebelliousness. Emerson's style of open-mindedness was much imitated by American authors in the following decades. Henry David Thoreau was an American author, naturalist, pacifist, tax resister, and philosopher, who is famous for Walden, which is about simple living amongst nature, and Civil Disobedience, which is about resistance to civil government. He was a lifelong abolitionist that delivered lectures that attacked the fugitive slave law, while also praising the writings of Wendell Phillips and defending the radical John Brown. Among his lasting contributions were his writings on natural history and philosophy, where he anticipated the methods and findings of ecology and environmental history. One might say he never stopped looking into nature for ultimate truth. Nathaniel Hawthorne was a 19th century American novelist and short story writer. He is seen as a key figure in the development of American literature. Many of his short stories have been read as moral allegories influenced by his Puritan background. One of his most famous tales, The Birthmark, which was published in 1843, concerns a young doctor who removes a birthmark from his wife's face, an operation which kills her. With his wife, illustrator and transcendentalist Sophia Peabody, he joined the Transcendentalist Utopian community at Brook Farm in 1841. In 1842 he married Sophia, and they moved to Concord, Massachusetts, where their neighbors included Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Frederick Douglass was an American abolitionist, editor, orator, author, statesman, and reformer. Called the Sage of Anacostia and the Lion of Anacostia, Douglass was among the most prominent African Americans of his time, and one of the most influential lecturers and authors in American history. Frederick Douglass sought to embody 3 keys for success in life. These were: believe in yourself, take advantage of every opportunity, and use the power of spoken and written language to effect positive change for yourself and society. Emily Dickinson was an American poet, and though she was virtually unknown in her lifetime, Emily Dickinson has come to be known as one of the 2 great American poets of the 19th century, the other being Walt Whitman. Her life has inspired numerous biographers and speculation, mostly about her sexuality, because not much is known about that. Dickinson's poetry is often recognizable at a glance, and is unlike the work of any other poet. Her talent with ballad and hymn meter, extensive use of dashes, and unconventional capitalization in her manuscripts, along with her imagery, combined to create a unique lyric style. During a religious revival that swept western Massachusetts during the decades of 1840 to 1850, Dickinson found her vocation as a poet. Most of her work is reflective of life's small moments and some larger issues in society. Over half of her poems were written during the years of the American Civil War, and many of these suggest that Civil War gave some of the tense feeling in her poetry. By her death, only 7 of Dickinson's poems had been published. Walt Whitman is generally considered to be the most important American poet of the 19th century. He wrote in free verse, not in traditional poetic form, relying heavily on the rhythms of common American speech. By 1841, Whitman was in New York City, where his interest turned to journalism. His short stories and poetry of the period were indistinguishable from popular work of the day. His writing was very unique. For the next few years, Whitman edited several newspapers and contributed to others. In 1848, he traveled south, and for 3 months worked for the New Orleans Crescent. The sheer physical beauty of the new nation made a vivid impression on him, and he was to draw on this experience in his later poetry. Not much is known of Whitman's literary activities that can account for his sudden change from journalist into revolutionary poet. The first edition of Leaves of Grass opened with a rather casual portrait of Whitman. In a lengthy preface, Whitman announced that his poetry would celebrate the greatness of the new nation. In his poems, Whitman turned his back on the literary models of the past. He stressed the rhythms of common American speech, emphasizing an informal and slang expression. Margaret Fuller was born on May 23, 1810, in Cambridgeport, Massachusetts. She was a very intelligent child who received a wonderful education from her father, Timothy Fuller, learning Greek and Latin at a very early age. Her father was a successful lawyer and later became a congressman. She attended several schools and continued to educate herself, learning German and Italian. Her father's death brought financial problems to the family, so she became responsible for the education of her younger siblings. She taught school for 2 years, but that did not give her enough time for her writing. In 1839, she established formal conversations on various topics, mostly for women, which were very successful for 5 years. She was close friends with the intellectuals of Boston and Concord, especially Ralph Waldo Emerson, and she would spend weeks at a time visiting in his home, teaching him German and talking. She was evidently a brilliant and thoughtful conversationalist, very respected for her intellect and learning. From 1840 to 1842, she served with Emerson as editor of the Dial, a literary and philosophical journal that she wrote many articles and reviews on art and literature for. In 1843, the Dial published her essay, The Great Lawsuit, Man versus Men, Woman versus Woman, in which she called for women's equality. In 1846, as foreign correspondent for the Tribune, Fuller traveled to Europe and sent back articles about letters and art in Europe, meeting many well-known European writers and intellectuals. Once she got to Italy in 1847, she became involved in the Revolution and decided not to return to America for a while. She fell in love with an Italian man, and they had a child a year later, a son named Angelo. During the Revolution of 1848 and the siege of Rome by the French forces, Fuller assumed charge of one of the hospitals of the city, while her husband took part in the fighting. When the Revolution failed, they sailed back to America in 1850. She told her friends she was carrying the manuscript of a book on the Italian Revolution, but she left her large collections of letters, especially the letters between her and Emerson, with friends in Europe, because she was afraid that there would be an accident. Her feelings of disaster proved to be true. The ship's captain died of smallpox, and his less accomplished replacement ran the ship around in a storm off of Fire Island, New York. Although in sight of land, she, her husband, and their son Angelo drowned as the ship went down. Her friends sent Thoreau to the wreckage, looking for her manuscript or any other items, but they were lost to the sea and scavengers.